Hello, and welcome to Steps for Close Reading with your professor, Dr. Lydia CdeBaca. The purpose of this lesson is to demonstrate the close reading process that we will use throughout the semester to analyze short stories and narratives. In this lesson, you will learn the steps of the close reading process, learn definitions of subject and theme as they relate to literature, be introduced to the elements of fiction, and see a model of close reading for each step. To begin, the steps for close reading that I will explain in this video really refer to a second, third, or fourth deep reading of each text. They presuppose that you will have already actively and attentively read the text at least once, so you should consider that active reading step 0. You've already viewed the UT video on actively reading. Be sure you use those strategies to help prepare you for the close reading process. The first step in close reading is to paraphrase or summarize the work. In a nutshell, what is it about? In this step, your focus is on explaining the subject or plot of the work. For instance, in Sandra Cisneros' short story, Salvador Late or Early, I might paraphrase the work by saying that it is about a boy who has to help his mom take care of his brothers. In the next step of close reading, we'll dig a little bit deeper into the meaning of the story by writing a hypothesis about its theme or central idea. This is the beginning of our interpretation, but at this stage, it's still a hypothesis because we have to find evidence from the text to test it in order to prove that it's a valid interpretation. For this stage, it helps to know the difference between a subject and a theme. Let's look at these two definitions from NTC's Dictionary of Literary Terms to find out how they're different. A subject is the topic or thing described in a work of literature. The subject differs from the theme of the work in that theme is a comment, observation, or insight about the subject. For example, birth, marriage, and baptism are subjects often found in literature, yet these may be speaking to the themes of cycles, purity, renewal, etc. A theme in literature is the central or dominating idea. It's what you can think of as the message implicit in a work. The theme of a work is seldom stated directly. It is an abstract concept indirectly expressed through recurrent images, actions, characters, and symbols, and must be inferred by the reader or spectator. Remember that inference is drawing a conclusion based on certain evidence. Theme differs from subject, as a previous definition explained, in that theme is a comment, observation, or insight about the subject. For example, the subject of a poem may be a flower. Its theme would be a comment on the fleeting nature of existence. To return to the example of Salvador Late or Early, we paraphrase the subject as a boy who has to help his mom take care of his brothers. But some themes might be loss of innocence, struggle, resilience. At this stage, I'm going to hypothesize that the central idea of Salvador Late or Early is Salvador's loss of youthful innocence due to all of his responsibilities. Once we have a hypothesis about the central idea of the text, the next step is to dig deeply into the text in order to understand how its elements work. At this stage of the close reading and analysis process, many students seem to think we're, quote, reading between the lines, when really we are just reading all of the lines. In fact, all of the words, the spaces, the punctuation, at this stage we are making observations of patterns of language and structure and asking questions about ambiguities or contradictions. At this stage, every aspect of the language is meaningful. However, we can classify those aspects of language into 6 different elements. They are language, tone, conflict, point of view, character, and setting. Within language and tone, there are several literary techniques that we can focus on, such as diction, metaphor, imagery, punctuation, syntax, symbols, and we'll delve more deeply into each of these in a later lesson. At this point, though, it is important to note that this is the stage where you begin to test your hypothesis as you search for evidence from the text that proves or disproves its validity. Although there isn't time to fully move through this stage of the close reading process, this is the stage that really takes the longest. We can make some brief observations from Salvador later early as examples. One is about images of innocence, like the crayons. What does it mean that they spill out of the box repeatedly? On one hand, it seems dangerous and it adds to Salvador's hectic morning, but on the other hand, it could represent a kind of freedom. And why does Cisneros refer to them as the 100 little fingers of all the different colors, and then say nub of black sticks? There's something unsettling about her use of the word nub here compared to fingers. Even though everyone knows you use the black crayon the most, so that's why it's the shortest, but it makes it sound like there's some disfigurement going on. There's something threatening here. Another symbol of innocence is the balloons. But again, even though they're light, it says that Salvador's body is too small for them. The imagery of him seems heavy, and there is something foreboding about the tone at the end of the piece, like something bad is going to happen to Salvador. The fourth step in the close reading process is analysis. Once you have enough observations and questions, go back to your paraphrase and hypothesis to see if you need to revise them or qualify them based on what you have found in the text. Your goal at this stage is to show how the elements you have identified relate to the story's meaning. For Salvador later early, I'm now not so sure about my hypothesis. It's a stretch for me to show how the imagery, symbols, and other elements relate to loss of innocence. But what I did notice this time around is more about visibility. And it's not just that Salvador is a boy who takes care of his brothers. He is a boy that nobody sees. But through the story and its vivid imagery, Cisneros forces us to see him until he disappears again on the horizon and we're still left looking for him. In fact, he is a boy that nobody sees in the beginning, but then through all of the vivid imagery, we see him and we start to come to know him. But then by the end, he keeps disappearing again and again. Now I'm starting to form my interpretation and my own argument, which relates the elements of my close reading to the meaning of the text. This is step 5, forming an argument about the significance of the form. And these are the 5 steps of the close reading process. First, you paraphrase or summarize the subject of the text. Next, hypothesize about what you think the central idea or theme is. The next stage takes the longest, and this is what we'll focus most on in class. Making observations about patterns in the language and writing questions or asking questions about things that seem ambiguous, that could have more than one meaning, contradictions, ironies, tensions in the text. The fourth step is to analyze. This is where you begin to explain how the elements that you have identified in step 3 relate to your paraphrase or hypothesis of the text. And then finally, in step 5, you make an argument about the text and explain why the analysis is significant. So what questions do you have about the close reading process? Write them down so that we can review them in the next class together. See you then.